We said there are two schools, the rationalist and the transplantist, within Sunnism. There is always a buyer, whether Saudi Arabia is a sponsor or not. There has always been a buyer in the Islamic world. In the north of the fence, in the coastal area between the Gulf of Aqaba and the Hejaz in the Red Sea, a huge tourism area called the Neon Project with a budget of billions of dollars is being opened. This includes studios, film studios, etc. All of these will change the religious life of Saudi Arabia. After 1902, the third state, the third Saudi state, which still continues today, was established. While the state was functioning here, Wahhabism always served as a kind of official sect, official ideology of that state.
Hello everyone from Istanbul School. Dear audience, today we will talk about Wahhabism and Saudi Arabia. Our guest is Prof. Dr. Mehmet Ali Büyükkara. Welcome, teacher.
Thank you, we found you welcome.
How are you?
Thank you, I hope you enjoy.
Professor, today we want to talk to you about Wahhabism and Arabia. Could you tell us about the emergence and characteristics of the Wahhabism movement?
Description. Wahhabism takes its name from its founder, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was a Hanbali scholar who was influential in the Islamic world. He was born in 1702 or 1703 and died at the end of 100 years. I said Hanbali scholar. When we look at the past, there are two main schools in al-Sunnah. One is the people of opinion, the other is the people of hadith. The people of opinion are based on Hanafism, and there are schools of theology. Ash'ari and Maturidiya emerged. These are the majority. There is also the school we call the people of Hadith or the people of Hadith, Ashab al-Hadith, which developed on the line of Ahmed bin Hanbal. While the people of Ray emphasized Istihad al-Qiyas, continued on the basis of diraya rather than narration, and interpreted based on the principles of knowledge and wisdom, the Ashab-ul-Hadith were the center of narration, the center of transmission, the triple definition of faith, and so on. There are great scholars of this school, such as Ibn Taymiyyah, who developed it and is respected among his followers. At least after the 8th century Hijri, we see the great influence of Ibn Taymiyyah. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab is also a scholar of that school. His ideas are particularly important for religious reform movements. Where does he live? If we consider today's map of Saudi Arabia, if we look at the map of Saudi Arabia today, in the center, around the capital, in the region formerly known as Yemame, now known as Najd, there are not many cities. It is a place where there were oases in ancient times and tribes lived. He was born and raised here and educated in Medina. He acquired a remarkable knowledge at a young age. Then he returned to his hometown after a visit to Basra. After his father's death, he assumed the position of his father's Qadi and became a scholar within this school. It makes a leap. I call it a tipping, a sharpening, an elevation, a sharpening. Why do I say tip and taper? Because Ibn Taymiyyah and the school of Hadith scholars who went beyond themselves and softened and even became more reasonable. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and the scholars who followed his path with his work. It has taken a turn towards extremism. This extremism is the intensified use of takfir and the terrorization, that is, the terrorizing of the takfir individuals and the masses. This process seriously affects the social structure. Perhaps we can add a third point to this. The establishment of Wahhabism is also the establishment of Saudi Arabia. Therefore, Wahhabism is also a Shabul Hadith line. It is the politicization of this line that would later be called Salafiyya.
What role did Wahhabism play in the establishment of Saudi Arabia?
Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab emphasizes some issues very intensely. Foremost among these is the issue of Tawheed. Tawheed is divided into three: Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, and another category known as Tawheed al-Asma and adjectives. In the form of Tawheed in its practical form, especially in this Tawheed of divinity, we can say that his work Kitab-i Tawheed is a masterpiece that is used very intensively today by this group. This work has been an important source for many scholars and researchers. Commentaries and glosses have been made on this book. Focuses heavily on the monotheism of worship. Of this monotheism. It is a rigid and controversial understanding based on the idea that certain Sufi rituals would harm monotheism. Graveyard work is intensively practiced. Prayers around graves, including the grave of the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him. Wahhabism was built on an understanding shaped by the view that the salawat and the prayers made after the salawat are wrong and contrary to Tawheed because they constitute an intermediary between Allah and the servant. In the places where he served as a Hanbali Qadi, the implementation of this Tawheed, putting it into practice, the destruction of tombs. The tombs are not the means. Since they are places, their destruction, the terrorizing of people who pray around these tombs creates problems in the region. This causes great reactions and unrest among the people. He had to leave several places. The last place he came to was right next to Riyadh, the capital of today's Saudi Arabia, which at that time was a small settlement, but today we can think of it as a suburb, the city of Riyadh, Duri. At that time there was no Saudi Arabia, but the Saud family lived there as a tribe. Muhammad ibn Saud, who was the head of the tribe at that time, provided Ibn Abdul Wahhab with a patronage. Okay, he says, I approve of your religious beliefs and I support your cause. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab replies that I recognize you as the Emir-ul-Believer. I recognize you as one of the believers. I see him as the one who will ensure their work and the advancement of Islam. There is a declaration. There is a pledge. It's called the Treaty of Dariyeh in history, 1744, that is, the result of an alliance between an emir and a scholar. It is an alliance. We can also call it the alliance of religion and politics. Saudi Arabia has a flag. It says the word Tawheed Lallahu Allah. It also has an emblem. This emblem reflects the cultural heritage of the country. For example, when we look at Saudi television, we see on the right side at the top a palm tree or date palm tree, and two swords diagonally below it. That tree represents property, power. The two swords underneath it, one is the sword of the emir, the sword of the politician. The other is the sword of the scholar. Together they protect property, power, and religious order. This is actually the founding philosophy of Saudi Arabia. With 1744, Saudi Arabia was established with this alliance, is being established. And Saudi Arabia, of course, Wahhabism gives fanaticism, and this fanaticism breeds with the wind, it spreads rapidly. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab writes invitation letters. These letters come to the Ottomans, inviting to monotheism, Arab tribes, Egypt, Iran. He writes letters everywhere. Some of these do not get any results in most of them, but when they do not get any results, they take military measures. Thus, Saudi Arabia also expands. They take Hijaz last. When they take Hijaz from the Ottomans, the Wahhabis say, by Hijaz, you are Mecca and Medina. In other words, you are a caliphate state. When these holy cities were lost, the Ottomans reacted very strongly to this. They lost them between 1803 to 1805. They took them back in 1813. In 1817, the Ottoman Egyptian army entered the capital of Wahhabism, Diriyah, and destroyed it. Thus, the first state ended. Then the Wahhabis established a second state. It also collapsed towards the end of the 19th century. After 1902, the third state, the third Saudi state that still continues today, was established. While this state was functioning here, Wahhabism always served as a kind of official sect, official ideology of that state.
He continues to serve.
It continues to serve, we can't really say now. Why?
How do we look at what we have? What condition is it in?
Salman bin Abdulaziz, the son of Abdulaziz ibn Saud, the founder of the third state, is the current king of Saudi Arabia. Wali'ad, who is the next king, since there is no more son of the founder's name will be passed on to the descendants. Salman's son, Muhammad ibn Salman. Muhammad ibn Salman, because his father is old, actually holds all the political strings, cultural strings, and military strings in Saudi Arabia today. He made a breakthrough, a big breakthrough. This Wahhabism has brought some problems to the state, especially after 2001, after September 11th. Wahhabism has always been associated with terrorism and Salafist extremism. And since this ideological legacy was in a political conjuncture that was the subject of a number of international tribunals that were constantly under suspicion because it was the owner of the ideology behind major terrorist activities in the country, it wanted to get rid of this burden uneasily. And he took a number of measures to reduce the influence of Wahhabism in the functioning of the state, in the functioning of society, especially in education. So we can already foresee that the weight of Wahhabism on the state, which was in the time of the previous kings, in the time of the previous Saud sultans, started to decrease during the succession of Muhammad ibn Salman. And if he becomes the king, if he becomes the next king, it will decrease even more.
Wahhabism is often criticized by other Islamic sects. What kind of criticisms are these?
Yes, extremism. As I said, they are very quick and sharp in takfir. Their fierce opposition to Sufism, which is one of the traditional codes of the Muslim world, is not just opposition. There are certain Sufi practices, such as rabbi, and then asking Allah through the intermediary of the sheikh. This can also be mediation to the sheikh's grave itself. These things in Sufism, their direct takfir of them and their fierce defense of these views attract attention and affect society deeply. In Saudi Arabia, not only do they takfir, but they have also turned it into a policing force in Saudi Arabia with violence and the state control of Emri bil Maru wa Nehi anil Munkar. These things, for example, during the crucifixion of other denominations, they do not allow them to practice openly. They reject the notion of a sect. They frequently express statements such as, "Our sect is the Hadith and the Quran." These harsh approaches and practices, all of these, especially their attitudes at this point of contact, were met with widespread reactions and criticism from Islamic countries and Muslims, especially the Ottomans, because they reminded them of the old externalism. They destroyed tombs and so on. There are examples of this in the Ottoman archives in Turkey, known as tomb destroyers. Since this aspect has influenced the Salafist movements of today, wherever there is Salafist extremism today, Wahhabism is always blamed for it, whether it is directly related to Wahhabism or not. For example, even in the latest ISIS issue, the Wahhabi mentality is pointed to as responsible. This has led to great debates and criticism in the international arena. Are they right? They are right because that extremism is understood through the Wahhabi mentality, through the extremist meanings that Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab attributed to the line of Ashab al-Hadith, and this of course provokes a reaction.
What impact does the relationship of these Salafi movements with Wahhabism have on Saudi Arabia's foreign policy?
Now, of course, Wahhabism has also been used as a kind of soft power of Saudi Arabia for many years, maybe until Ibn Salman. In other words, they have an organization like Rabitatul Alamil Islami, which is a little bit reminiscent of Tika in Turkey, a little bit reminiscent of Yunus Emre Institute, but much older than them. It was established in the 1960s. Of course, Saudi Arabia is a rich country. It has oil capital. It has the advantages that this brings. It is trying to increase its global influence with these resources. They are expanding their dominance in the religious sphere. Using this, they are everywhere where there are Muslims outside Saudi Arabia. They publish books, they establish foundations, they establish madrasas depending on the place. Sometimes this happens in Western countries, sometimes in Islamic countries. Thus, in the world, there are mostly sects such as Hanafism, Shafism, Malikism, and the Maturidic and Ash'aric sects formed by them in the field of theology. By deeming these sects as bid'ah, wrong, and outside the al-sunnah, it opens a space, a religious space. Of course, there is also a political field behind this religious field. Saudi Arabia is harassing both Iran, which is considered to be the representative of Shia, and through this Hanafism, Matujidism, and as a country that has inherited the Sufi understanding of the Ottoman Empire, with a religious understanding that leans more on Hanafism, away from excesses and extremes. Of course, there is a soft power situation here, and they are using it, but as I said, will this continue with Muhammad ibn Salman in the new era, or will they stop? If they leave it, of course, Iran's Shia expansionism, which is the opposite thesis of Iran's state-sponsored Shia expansionism, can take something more comfortable. In other words, it can take a position.
Yes, in this context, if we look at the future of Wahhabism in more detail, that is when the reforms in Saudi Arabia are taken into account, is there a future for the continuity of these movements?
In other words, these two schools, the rationalist and the rationalist, as we said, always have bias with their various interpretations within Sunnism. Whether Saudi Arabia is the sponsor of this or not, whether it is the patron of this or not, there has always been a buyer for this in the Islamic world. Outside of Saudi Arabia, maybe we can talk about it in another broadcast. There are Salafist currents, that is, there are Salafist currents that do not accept Saudi Arabia's status as the emiral believer, that say that it was like this at the beginning and then it was corrupted, and that are disturbed by this situation. These currents will somehow continue on legal and illegal grounds with or without the sponsorship of Saudi Arabia.
Yes, that's how we look at it today. So, what kind of an impact has the withdrawal of Wahhabism had on social life right now?
Sure. I mean, through the ulama, we were talking about a movement that has an impact on society. It has a university, Medina Islamic University. This is an educational institution that spreads Salafism, or rather Wahhabism, throughout the world. There are a large number of Muslim people from all over the world who come to Medina to receive higher education with good scholarship opportunities and then return to their countries after graduation, whether it is Africa, the Balkans, the Caucasus, wherever. After returning there is a very large mass of people who have received education and have cultivated the Wahhabi ideology there. These universities, especially the Sharia faculties, will of course lose a lot of their old budgets. And as I said in the world, the spread of Salafism at this point will slow down. In the Saudi society, we cannot directly connect it to Wahhabism, but Wahhabism, there are cases where it often merges with custom and creates a set of social rules. For example, it does not originate from Wahhabism, but Wahhabism supports this. Women not being able to drive a car, not being able to get a driver's license, this was lifted during the time of Prince Salman. For example, this was a very important initiative. Women were not allowed to go to the theatre, cinema, or rather theatre and cinema. Now there is theatre and cinema, and women also play an important role here. And as spectators, they are widely involved in these cultural and social events, including football matches, major concerts, and can also take part in various organizations. A team of youth. So they have aspirations. I think that Mohammed ibn Salman's reforms, in quotation marks, are strongly supported in Saudi Arabia, especially by the youth. Apart from oil revenue, Prince Salman has big projects, especially in tourism and infrastructure, as new economic inputs that will sustain Saudi Arabia after the oil runs out and is depleted. This is in the Red Sea, north of Jeddah, on the coast between the Gulf of Aqaba and Hejaz. The NEOM project, which is a huge multi-billion dollar tourism, technology and entertainment development, including studios, movie studios and so on. All this will change the religious life of Saudi Arabia, just as the rigidity of Wahhabism was broken to a certain extent after the discovery of oil in the 1950s, 60s and today, in the 2020s and 2030s. It will be broken much more in these new openings, and social transformation will accelerate. It seems so.
Let's see what happens. Thank you very much for your valuable comments. We talked extensively about the establishment of Wahhabism and the establishment of Saudi Arabia, sir. Thank you very much for your valuable comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dear viewers, we talked about Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia today. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.